Well, hello, everybody. My name is Garrett Schmidt, and I'm the CEO and managing editor for VBC Exhibit Hall. And I'd like to welcome you all to today's live webinar discussion hosted by Arcadia. And this one is called Beyond the Dashboard, Operationalizing Market Insights Across the Enterprise. And I'm excited you all joined us today. We're going to have kind of a different format today. It'd be more of like a fireside chat kind of discussion and a lot of and there'll be some audience interaction as well, as we will have a poll question and a time to ask some questions to the speakers as well towards the end. So if you have a question at any point during the presentation, you can ask it using your control module. There's a place for questions on there, and we are going to have kind of a lightning round for taking audience questions. So you can put them there. Also, the session today is being recorded. So what's going to happen is when we conclude, I will send an email to all of you, as well as anyone that registered, and they will receive a link to the recording as well as to the slides from today's presentation that can be downloaded. And that way you can share it with colleagues and friends and rewatch it at your own leisure. So without further ado, I wanted to briefly introduce our speakers today. We have with us Dr. Luke Hansen, and he is the Chief Medical Officer for Arcadia. So welcome, Dr. Hansen. We have Zach Bradel, and he is the Senior Product Director with Arcadia. And then also moderating for us today, we have Blair Money, and she is the Director of Product Marketing. So wanted to welcome to you all, and I will pass it over to you, Blair.
Sure. Thanks, Garrett. And thank you to everybody on the line for having us today. We are excited to facilitate a conversation around the challenges of operationalizing data across the whole enterprise and the ways that we have seen organizations be really successful at that. Before started, Zach, Dr. Hansen, why don't we have you guys introduce yourselves a little bit more and tell the audience kind of where you're coming from. Dr. Hansen, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, so good to be here. I'm the Chief Medical Officer at Arcadia, but equally importantly, I'm a former customer of Arcadia in a VBC organization. I was the CMO for Pop Health at a multi-hospital system that had a large CIN, and yeah, I'm a big believer that as hard as data is, actioning whether it's provider behavior change or other behavior change in your organization is really the hardest part of this work. So looking forward to the conversation. Zach, go ahead.
Yeah, good to be on, and thanks everyone for joining today. Zach Bradel, I've had the pleasure of being part of this organization for about 7 years now, and I think why I'm excited about this topic is because I've actually bounced around a few different roles. I've spent time in the analytics department, I've spent time in the growth department presenting a lot of insights, and now I've spent time on the product team kind of organizing and making sure our analytics are set up in a way that our customers can be successful. So seeing it from a lot of different angles kind of gives you a perspective that you've done a lot of things wrong in the past and can address things in the future.
Absolutely. Well, I am excited to moderate a conversation between the two of you and hopefully give the audience some of your expertise here. In terms of the goals of what we hope everybody walks away with, really aiming to kind of give ideas around how to build data and build it into kind of your enterprise and different workflows so that you can ultimately take action on it. And also hoping that we can kind of share some of the community best practices that we have all seen here. As you kind of heard in their introductions, both Zach and Dr. Hansen have talked with a lot of different organizations and kind of seen things that have worked well and also things, like Zach said, that you would do differently. So excited to kind of share that. As a little bit of context for everybody, just to kind of orient how we all know each other and who Arcadia is, and particularly CareJourney as well. CareJourney is it's a product arm within the broader Arcadia Health data platform. And we are heavily focused on value-based care market intelligence as well as provider intelligence. So we have spent a whole lot of time wrangling a lot of data. We have access to 100% of the Medicare fee-for-service data, as well as the Medicare Advantage data. And then we also have access to a sizable amount of commercial data as well. And we have really wrangled all of this data together to help organizations identify benchmarks and kind of contextualize their performance. And so across a whole host of use cases, this is applied from network design to managing your population to coaching different providers. And so we've really seen organizations work to deploy these data insights across these different use cases. And so that is what we are excited to bring to the conversation today. As you kind of think about all those different use cases, you can kind of start to understand, that we have a lot of experience with kind of the challenge of operationalizing data. And so for me, the kind of big challenge here and the problem that we see is that healthcare kind of as an industry is very rich in data. There is no shortage of data points, data feeds, et cetera. But that it is also kind of action poor. So Zach, you mentioned that you have had a lot of different kind of roles across the organization. And as a part of that, I know you have talked to countless healthcare organizations. I'm kind of curious, what does this challenge and what does this problem really mean to you?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I mean, this triggers to me. I think the number that's thrown around often at Arcadia is we ingest something like 12 petabytes of data per month, or run that through our algorithms every month. And I mean, that's just a tremendous amount of data that we wouldn't even have thought 10 to 15 years ago that we would be able to work through on a monthly basis. But when you think about like what has changed from healthcare cost perspective or outcomes perspective, like we haven't made near that much progress in addressing those issues as we have on just increasing the amount of data that we've been able to put through our system. So I guess what I'm saying, I'm not trying to say that there should be, 12 petabytes of actions off of each one of those individual rows of data, but there should be more than the few that we've created. And I hope that we as Arcadia can strive to produce more, and also through this we can kind of push those of you listening to create more off of that tremendous amount of data.
Yeah. Dr. Hansen, you've kind of had a lot of experience with it from a different angle. You've spent time at AMITA and UHG, and then also in hospitals. And so why, Zach kind of highlighted that there's all this data and that, we have trouble getting insight. Why do you think that is? That's kind of a difficult question to answer, but I'm sure you kind of have theories from seeing it from different angles.
Yeah, I mean, I think a way to characterize the fundamental issue is that the complexity of our industry with all of the different stakeholders means that specific quantifiable metrics can be rendered differently depending on who the stakeholder is and their different interest. I mean, even within a provider organization, there are clinical takes on a data point and there are financial takes on a data point. And the CFO of an organization is going to look very differently at production than a clinician is. And we have to reconcile those. I think usually we don't do a very good job of arriving at one data point. And if there's one phrase that hangs in my mind when I think of conversations with customers, it's this idea of a source of truth. Because the fact is, like, yes, there needs to be a source of truth where there's alignment among stakeholders. But because our industry is so complicated, I mean, even for something as straightforward as blood pressure measurement, that can be very different. There's a HEDIS definition of blood pressure management. There's a much more practical definition of blood pressure management that I think blood pressure measurement, like what a blood pressure number is and what you action on. Just that difference is notable because we have to be very specific for something like HEDIS or for regulatory standards, but the day-to-day work of people is much more nuanced. And I think and the reason I'm sort of making that distinction is because people live in their day-to-day work, and they live in their workflow. And so if our metrics don't appeal to that, then we're not going to be as effective. Quality overall, it can feel like the tail is wagging the dog, right? Like we have a source of truth often through the HEDIS lens for quality, and that's right because improving those HEDIS defined quality measures does lead to better outcomes. It certainly is tied to payment too. That said, for a clinician, and when I say, I mean the whole care team, for the whole care team, the work of taking care of an individual patient right now is so much more nuanced and qualitative than that HEDIS measure. And so we're managing blood pressure, but we're managing a person as opposed to HEDIS, which is really very quantitative.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And I think one of the things that you said early on in that response was focusing on how there are a whole bunch of stakeholders. And then you also mentioned how they use like really defined workflows. So I think kind of with that in mind, Zach, we bring in a whole host of data. We then work to kind of find the insight from it. But then what we end up having to do is translate that in a way that then is meaningful to somebody, right? And so this means different things to all these different stakeholders, as Dr. Hansen mentioned. And a lot of the work that you do, Zach, is from my perspective, creating really beautiful dashboards that help kind of unearth these insights in a way that then somebody is going to recognize them and understand what they are supposed to do from that. So I'm curious from your perspective, in order to kind of continually build these dashboards or modules and kind of help guide people to these insights, what are things that you think are kind of guiding principles and really important for that?
Yeah, I think there are a few things that are really important here. The first thing that comes to mind is, over the past couple of years, we've actually developed a framework we like to call the drivers of success, and Dr. Hansen has been one of the main guys leading the charge on that, and a lot of you on the phone, I'm sure, have heard him explain those to you. But essentially, it lays out 6 pillars divided into both uh, increasing your revenue as well as managing costs that we believe are kind of prescriptive ways that you can be successful in a value-based care or as a value-based care organization, but also kind of more in general as a health system or as a payer, right? And those principles, some of which are making sure you're managing specialty care or post-acute care, others of which are appropriately addressing and accurately coding risk, right? I think those pillars are good driving standards to make sure, hey, does this dashboard at least fall into one of those categories at a minimum? It should probably dive much deeper than that and give further KPIs and drill down capabilities. But at minimum, does it go to one of those pillars that we believe are the pillars to make you successful as a value-based care entity or other? I think the second thing that I would say, or the second principle would be, does this dashboard answer a question for a user? I think like ultimately, one of the things I don't enjoy as a product person is creating titles or names for dashboards or products. But what I come back to often is like, should the name of the dashboard just be the question that it's answering? Like, how are my readmissions doing? How are my ED frequent flyers, right? Like, does that just get to the point more than a different type of title? But I think it really does explain, like, if you can't describe a question that a user would be able to answer by looking at this dashboard, then you've kind of like failed in that scenario. And then I think the last guiding principle that I would want to call out would be, and this is a little bit to Dr. Hansen's point of kind of like knowing your user or your use case. Like I like to segment our users into that we're helping them in 2 different ways. We're either saying like you're using this dashboard because it's taking work off your plate that you would have had to go through more manual processes or data gathering or other things that would take you a lot longer period of time, and we're kind of smushing that down a little bit and tackling a lot of that work for you, a little bit of giving you the answer. So that's kind of one type. Or the second type is like, are we giving you further information for you to dive deeper and create insights that you didn't have in the past? So maybe like readmissions could be one. The first type of the user that I described would be, they just want to know, like, kind of straight up, how are my readmissions compared to last quarter, and are we doing better than benchmarks in readmissions, better than peers? And that's just the answer that they want. Whereas the second type of user, you may say, hey, here's all of your patients who had readmissions over the last month, and here's different social determinant of health data that we've layered on top to give you another look at, hey, maybe this data is going towards the problem of the readmissions. So it's kind of like a segmentation of users in that last bucket.
Yeah. I like that kind of thread that you mentioned around the, should a data view or a dashboard, or, you could even think of like a report, should it just be titled the question that you're trying to get somebody to solve? Because I think that a lot of times challenges like this have occur because there's kind of a mismatch of expectations. And so Dr. Hansen, that kind of guides me into a fun question for you is, what do you think is kind of a myth that contributes to this problem, or something that you hear kind of related to taking action on data that just really isn't true and kind of gets in people's way?
Yeah, I mean, I
There
was
are probably a
talking
lot.
before. Yeah, well, yeah, no, totally. Like I was talking before about this source of truth idea,
Yeah.
and I think there absolutely is such a thing as truth. There's absolutely such a thing as the right thing to do in a given situation. But I would say, like, I'll use a clinical context to make the point that as clinicians we make decisions about people all the time. You guys hear me okay? Sorry, I got a bit of feedback.
Yeah, you're good now.
We make decisions all the time about treatment with incomplete information. Because if someone presents in the emergency room and they're hypotensive, there's a lot of reasons why that could be, but there is this fundamental focus on, we need to get their blood pressure up, and then we'll do the additional work to figure out the why, the underlying thing. And so there's action that should be triggered. As you were talking, Zach, I was thinking about what the point of a dashboard is, and I think it's to give insight, but it's even more to trigger action. And the situation that we often see people get stuck in among our users is the uncertainty about what to do, with what the action should be. What can still happen, though, what a successful customer of ours will do is take a step back and say, well, I might not know why so bear with me with this metaphor, why the hypotension's there, but I sure know there's hypotension. And so let's action, like, what we know will affect that, what can improve that. And so just to kind of circle back to the question you asked, Blair, like, I think the myth is that we can't act until the data's perfect. Which isn't to say we should not pursue perfection. We absolutely should. Just like in medicine, we should always pursue the best outcome, the perfect outcome. I think, though, there needs to be pragmatism, which means we need to act and not wait indefinitely. Like, if there is a critical issue, we need to start acting with the data we have, while we continue to make the data better, to get further insights that will help us guide our actions as a next step.
Do you think that that's a common, view amongst providers in general? Like, do you think that they feel that way, or do you think that they're looking for perfection and, like, doubtful because of maybe past experiences, and that's something that we need to address?
Yeah, I mean, you may be aware that there are, like, these provider cultural dynamics in different specialties. Some providers are thought to be more action oriented, and some are thought to be more reflection oriented. I'm an internist, so I am characterized as being more reflective. And we're going to get more data, we're going to get more consults to get more input. And that works fine when the patient's not hypotensive.
Sure.
So I think that providers understand that in a critical situation, and there are many organizations we work with that are at that, like this is a hard time to be running a provider organization. The dynamics are super complex. There are many organizations we work with that I would say need to start doing the work of managing, whether it's managing total cost of care or figuring out how to optimize contract performance in other ways. Like that needs to happen now with the data that's available. Um, and so I think the providers, and this is, I'm not going to generalize to say providers understand that better than non-providers. Um, but I guess what I would say is overall, um, situational awareness, the insight into your organization and what needs to happen this quarter is really critical. And so if you are responsible for data accuracy, and you only chase data accuracy and you ignore that the situation is dire, that is a problem. And I think there is a middle road. And I'll just say it again because I don't want anybody to construe what I'm saying. Like you can't do high risk things with insufficient information. But often what we see is that there is low hanging fruit that's very clear in the data, as it's being rendered now, and we can find confidence, a level of confidence in the data as it is to action decisioning around clinical operations, even though we acknowledge that the data is not perfect, um, that there are, well, I don't want to throw in the towel, but that there are always going to be issues when you have that diverse stakeholder group with different perspectives on data and different stakeholders bringing different data streams in. It is complex. That complexity can't keep us from acting decisively when there is an opportunity to do that.
Yeah. I couldn't agree with you guys more. I think this is something that I've seen kind of across all of my conversations with different constituents and different stakeholders as well. But I also am curious, the three of us work closely together. And so I want to make sure, we are not kind of an echo chamber. So I would be curious from kind of the audience's perspective, you know, how, reality check us. How is this something that everybody else is experiencing as well? Are kind of insights, going to die, kind of as a metaphor here of, not people not taking action on them. Is this something that, we are just experiencing, or are other organizations seeing this as well? So Garrett, if we want to launch the poll, would be curious to kind of hear what everybody on the line feels before we dive into kind of our solutions.
All right, you will see on your screen a question here. Where do insights go to die in your organization? Is it provider scorecards that no one uses? Governance meetings with no follow-up? Shared drives with 1,000 dashboards? At the point of care, no real-time delivery? Or they don't die, we operationalize them. I have a hard time with that word, I have found. So we're going to give a few more seconds here. And this is anonymous, by the way. This is kind of just for fun, and we'll show the results here momentarily. So if you want to go ahead and participate, then that would be awesome. And it is a choose one that best applies. If you're thinking, oh man, there's several of these, I guess maybe the one that you're dealing with right now. And looks like most of the results have come in. We'll give it about another 5 long seconds here, and we'll close it down and take a look at the results. 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. All right. Okay. Blair, Zach, Dr. Hansen, are you able to see these results on your screen?
Yeah, I can actually see it. I was expecting that I wasn't going to be able to, but I can. I think overall, this is really encouraging to me, kind of on 2 points. One, Zach, Dr. Hansen, it looks like we have not made this problem up and are not living in an echo chamber. A lot of people are experiencing this as a challenge. In terms of kind of the, place where most of the insights went to die, and forgive us for being kind of a little sassy there with our language, but as our joke, a lot of people are seeing that they are going to, shared drives with thousands of dashboards, probably just logged on, one particular use case and then maybe never revisited, if I had to guess. Looks like we're also seeing a fair number of people vote for governance meetings with no follow-ups. We also see some for provider scorecards. But I will say the second thing that I also find encouraging here is, while it validates the kind of challenge that we are all seeing, I think I'm optimistic that a couple people did vote for the fact that they don't die, that they are being operationalized, and so that is kind of really encouraging to me, that once we do get these insights, if at the right place, then people can take action, and they can start to kind of make meaningful strides for their organization, for their patients, for their providers, et cetera. Dr. Hansen, Zach, I don't know if anything else stands out to you on the results.
Yeah, I mean,
go ahead, Jack.
Yeah, I was just going to comment on just I think I agree with the top answer, as I think what I would have predicted, of shared drives of 1,000 dashboards or data sets. I think often we get in this cadence of moving on to the next thing before you've fully operationalized and gotten buy-in on the thing that you had started, right? And then it just goes to the next and the next and the next. So yeah, I think we are going to spend some more time talking about that later, and specifically in like the culture around that. But like, I think that's ultimately the core issue that you notice there is like, you kind of need to go deep on something and finish it before moving on to a next thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think this reflects the point that you made earlier, Blair, about being data rich, but action poor, or arguably insight poor. We can have data and then we can make dashboards off it, but that doesn't translate to action. So I think that sort of tees up what we want to talk about.
Yeah, so I didn't kind of introduce the audience to this at the beginning, but we have divided up our kind of conversation here in a couple of acts. So the second act here is very much thinking about that action that Dr. Hansen and Zach just mentioned. And our hope here is that we can really kind of learn from each other, and think about, what have the three of us seen gone really well, and how can folks on the line who are listening then kind of take that back to their specific roles. So I think kind of my high level philosophy around what really enables people to take action off of data is that that really occurs when you have the best data. I won't say 100% accurate, Dr. Hansen, per your comment, but when you have the best data and you have it seen and you have it in a way that is understood by that particular stakeholder, and then you have it to them at a cadence where then they can act at the right time to make a meaningful change. So I would be curious, kind of, Dr. Hansen, in thinking about that overall approach and kind of what guides that success, what is the most recent example that you have seen where someone has kind of gotten out of this trap of like insights going to die, and maybe they've applied these principles? What specific thing were they trying to solve? Kind of how did they go about it?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I'll just start off by saying that confidence in the data is critical to acting on the data. Our discussion so far, I do believe you don't need complete confidence to make certain decisions, but you also need to find the data that you are confident in. And so as in asking that question, I think of a customer, it's really several customers we have that rely on third-party Medicare data to make really important decisions. And no data is perfect. We've made that point a couple times so far. Even Medicare has liabilities, fallibilities, but in the ACO, the Medicare ACO context, there are a group. We have a ton of organizations that have access to complete Medicare-based profiles of provider performance, and can impute from that how much a specific provider or a specific TIN will contribute or detract from performance in a Medicare ACO. And they pay for that data. Not all of them use that data to actually put, you know, put the varsity team on the field. And the reasons for that are complex, and we can talk more about that. But that's an example that comes to mind that where I really every week I see examples of this is as good as it's going to get, and so it's not a data reliability issue. I don't think it's necessarily a confidence issue. We have to believe what's there. It's that next step. It's taking the action step, because it's a hard action step that would come from an insight about a given TIN that isn't up to muster for ACO inclusion.
Yeah. Dr. Hansen, I think this use case that you are mentioning around, building a network, ensuring that you have kind of this varsity team, this is something that you and I have talked about a lot. In fact, I think it was maybe the last webinar that we were on together where we were kind of talking about this use case. And so I wonder, are we kind of broken records in thinking about that? Do we need to take out a billboard on every highway? Why is it that folks are not kind of using all of this data insight to really manage their network and come up with that varsity team? What's so hard about it?
Yeah, I think it's okay to ask these questions. It's time to ask these questions. There is across our industry a certain amount of skepticism about VBC as it's been defined, and I don't know if anyone feels like we've got it right yet. And I don't think we have. I don't think that there is a playbook or a cookbook that anybody's written about how to do it right. So we should be asking these questions. Why so many years after the ACA, or so many years with us as an industry, knowing that we're kind of on an unsustainable path in many of our lines of business? Why haven't we made the change? There are external dynamics, macro dynamics, and there are sort of internal or micro dynamics. And I think the internal dynamics are what I see our customers struggle with the most, which is to say, like harkening back to that example that I had earlier about choosing which TINs are going to be in your ACO. Number one, we still are working off of a fee-for-service chassis, and that's the reality. So if your sponsor in your ACO is reliant on fee-for-service as a revenue source, you're sailing upstream, foot in two canoes, whatever boat metaphor you want to use. It's not easy. It's not easy to sell that internally. The other piece that is, I think it's important to talk about. These are really hard conversations to have with practices, and there are many community provider organizations that are really closely tied to the independent provider groups, or the employed providers for that matter. And it's not fun to talk to somebody about they're not good enough. And frankly, what I see is there's a certain amount of avoidance of these hard conversations. That doesn't mean there's not a way forward. There absolutely is a way forward where everybody can be included in the progress and the arc of transformation. And we can talk more about how to tool that. But I think that the fact is that it's hard to call out, not just call out a performance opportunity, but then to exclude based on that performance, observed performance to date. And I think that's been a barrier.
Yeah, I agree. Zach, I'm curious, in this particular use case, how do you kind of recommend that folks, and how have you seen folks go from, we see the data talking about, XYZ, maybe uncovering an insight, to then actually doing something about it? Like, what does that workflow look like?
Yeah. No, that's a great question. And Garrett, if you don't mind, maybe with this question, I'll show a little bit of a demo for a second. Well, let me pull this up. Yeah, I mean, I think where a lot of people get caught in not taking an action off of data, and I might in here even go off of Dr. Hansen's example of network building is, he mentioned the perspective of maybe having a year where poor savings or just general poor performers that you're looking to grow and advance your network overall. But there's plenty of ACOs out there that maybe made a decent chunk of savings last year, feel comfortable with their roster, and kind of that's maybe actually the point in the downfall is that they are too comfortable, and that comfortability uh, prevents them from looking at data or using data that they have at their fingertips. So even just a simple example of, if I am that ACO that feels comfortable with my roster, feels comfortable with my savings last year, one thing that you could easily realize through some of this 100% Medicare data is that um, organizations around you are still heavily growing and potentially trying to take over the TINs that have been high performing within your network. So what I pulled up here is just a picture of all entities, both REACH and MSSP, participating in Florida in 2024. If I scroll over here, I can just get to this percent patient growth column. And you can see there are some ACOs up 23% of patients, up 63, up 270, up 25, up 65. And I think it's important to realize that, hey, like, even if you're not going to go have those tough conversations with your practices, maybe you need to have those defensive conversations on, are you happy with the incentive structure that we've set up? Like that, we've been doing a good thing together, right? Let's keep it going, right? And that's Dr. Hanson, I'm sure that's a different type of conversation that may be more comfortable. But in this situations, I think we see a lot of orgs miss having those conversations and miss that action, again, because they felt comfortable and less threatened. So I think that's one point I would bring up. That's seems like a simpler, not crazy of diving into anything novel of data, but puts you at an action point that can keep you as a successful ACO.
Yeah. I like how that's, a completely different scenario than what Dr. Hansen was talking about, because I think that there's data that you would weave in that says, and looking at your performance against benchmark and what we've seen versus what we expect, you aren't performing well. But then here you're showing, completely different data points that then inform, yes, we are doing well, but we need to focus on what everybody else is doing, to continue to ensure that we are doing that. So, a variety of different data points here that kind of, help position organizations for the same use case and kind of same thought process, waiting their varsity roster, like Dr. Hansen mentioned. This is I think probably this particular use case, I'm most familiar in thinking about it from a PCP perspective, Zach. I'm curious from a specialty perspective, how is that something that folks should be kind of looking at data for?
Yeah, and let me we could go to a different view that could be good for this. Yeah, so I think when we think about it from the specialty lens, it becomes something that we brought in from just related to VBC contracts, ACO reach and MSSP, to something that's more broadly applicable to folks in a VBC contract, health systems just trying to curate and make sure they can manage the patients in their area, or even payers trying to make sure that they have a high performing tier network that they can pitch to their patients and have more patients join their plan, right? So I think you often find either through Arcadia or other sources, a way to basically say, I've put in my network, here are the providers that are part of my specialist network. How are they performing, right? So just to orient here at Arcadia, we have what's called the Provider Performance Index, where we have used claims data, group that into episodes, and evaluate providers on the performance of that episodes on an observed to expected basis. So it basically allows us to say, per physician X episode, how is a provider doing on a cost and quality performance basis? one being poor performing compared to benchmark or peers, and five being the highest performing. So, what you can see here and see through similar other ratings is this mock network that I'm looking into, doing very well in dermatology, for example, 4.1 on both sides. But cardiology kind of in the middle on a cost performance perspective, and maybe a little bit below down in the red in the twos on a quality performance perspective. So I think you have this data, right? Then it's like, again, the question is like, what action do you do on this? And I think that this, without getting into any more data, leaves you kind of three options. And I'd be interested to hear if Dr. Hanson agrees with these or would add any more to the three. But one is a coaching opportunity. You say, I've got these providers in my network. I'm not changing this network. I need to understand, what they're doing poorly, and I need to give them recommendations on how to improve that, right? And I think the key thing to that is you've got to bring examples to the table. You've got to say like, quality is at a 2.9 because these 10 specific patients had complications of X, Y, and Z, right? And that has to come along with the coaching. I think another option that you could take as far as a action would be change in routing decisions, right? You could say like, hey, there are these other cardiologists out there that are higher performing. We're going to put them in our tier one network, and we're going to instruct our primary care providers to route to them. This is a little easier on like the MA side where you have a little bit more effect in prior auth and such, a little bit harder on the MSSP ACO reach side, but still not doable, right? Or still doable. And then the last option I would say is you could potentially consider like you as as an individual entity don't need to feel like you need to cover the full gamut of responsibility for your patients, or at least not on your own. There are continually engagements kind of known as subcap engagements, subcapitation engagements, where organizations like Chamber Cardio, Cardio One, I think Novo Cardio, are able to kind of help guide you through managing the population and either create their own network, use the networks they already have, use benefits the digital tools they already have. But point is like bolster the care and management of patients with cardiac conditions. I don't know. I think we at Arcadia are generally bullish on those and feel that those are things that without those it'll be tough for the healthcare market to turn. We think that those are necessary for us to really bend that cost curve long term. So I don't know. That's kind of how I think about it on the specialist side. Like a lot of this data, you can see across a variety of like telling me again in broad strokes, are we performing well or not? And then it's just those action opportunities that set up from there.
Yeah, I agree. One other theory that's a little unrelated that I have. I'm curious what you guys think of it. From my perspective, in doing this for so many years, it feels like every time I look at kind of the headlines of what people are doing, different news organizations, there is always some new metric or some new care model or some new kind of like secret sauce for kind of unearthing action and figuring out how to kind of impact your population. I'm curious if you guys feel like kind of that, do those work? Does that kind of, hinder consistency, so that then it contributes to inaction because people are always, switching and focusing on kind of a new metric here, a new metric there. What are kind of your perspectives on that?
Yeah, I mean, I agree that there's, we're trying to find our way in value still. There isn't a playbook. I think it's interesting to think about the fact that we probably do have a rather evolved playbook in fee for service. Like there is a way to do it. Not everybody is successful, but there is consensus about how you succeed. And um, what we can learn from that, I would argue, is that the payment levers are what drive the way that the system functions. Um, and so, I'm I'll just put my cards on the table. I am a believer that if we can delegate um, appropriate risk to providers, and then we pay the providers in a way that it's their money to invest in health as they think is most appropriate. I think that's the way forward. Now that it sounds it sounds like value. It is value. It's an expression of that. But I don't think that a lot of the models actually have achieved that, right? And so there has not been a proliferation of capitation, that's for sure. And to the extent that an ACO or other arrangements are providing a sort of an annual target, that there's a reconciliation and there's potential additional revenue. I don't think we've done a good enough job of making sure that the frontline providers, or frankly the care team larger than just the physicians, that the care team overall realizes the financial benefits of highly efficient, highly effective care. Um, that needs to change, right? And I hope that the models that are going to come out in the next several years will help us focus on what I think we've learned from the last 50 years, which is that the payment model is going to determine the delivery model. And if we put the right payment model in place, we will see the right delivery model, with the caveat that we need guardrails, and we need oversight. Um, but we have that. That's what digitization has offered us, is the ability to know whether care is not just cheaper, but it's actually more effective.
Yeah. Garrett, if you give me back the share, I can pull back up the slides. But I think that kind of the next piece here of kind of making sure that you take action on data and operationalizing it across your enterprise is thinking about kind of your culture. Um, and so, Dr. Hansen, when we were kind of noodling around our thoughts on this topic, I asked you kind of, how do you create a culture that is analytics focused? And you basically told me that you didn't think that that was the goal, that the goal was more something else. So I'm curious, kind of, what did you mean by that?
Yeah. So this is, I feel like it's continuing a theme that I've been hammering on so far, which is like it's
Hammer on
not
it.
about the data exclusively. It's not about the insights exclusively. The third piece of that is action. So what I would argue is that you need a culture of action where people are willing to commit to action. Now that needs to be absolutely tuned to a level of clarity about goals, and that's something we haven't really hit on yet. But I think like you can't succeed unless you know what you're trying to do, and I think that a lot of organizations, at the end of the day, that is the struggle, is to get clarity around what matters in the year, what matters in the quarter. It can often be described at an executive level or at a strategic level, but I would be really interested. I mean, I would love to just sample everybody who's in the audience. You heard me say, Blair and Zach, we were talking about it. Like, I know the organizations I've been in where that clarity from top to bottom was there, and they are the highest performing organizations. And it is a cultural thing. There's tooling that's required, but it's almost like the data isn't going to matter if there isn't that clarity of action at the front line. And the data informs that absolutely and is necessary, but it's not like the data is going to do that on its own.
Yeah, I agree. And I think kind of your point there around making sure that all folks who are involved in the organization have that clarity is really important. That to me creates kind of another challenge because a lot of the folks that need to be kind of bought in and aware of kind of these, guiding principles for action and metrics are physicians. And so I think the reason why I see that as a challenge is, there are I've experienced in conversations that it is a whole different approach to get kind of physicians bought in on data versus, getting the data teams bought in on data. It's just a different way of thinking about it and a different conversation. So I'm curious, Zach, how do you think about that when you are ultimately kind of, unearthing these insights for all stakeholders to see? How do you think about making sure that you're not only getting buy-in from the data teams and the, administrators, but then also those physicians as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think trust, first of all. I think everyone probably knew that off the bat, but it is super important to just ensure that you're able to explain the methodology around something that you're producing, and that you're confident in the data quality. And again, it doesn't need to be 100% accurate, as we've talked about earlier, but it can't be, you know, I didn't do this case. There wasn't a complication here. Like, it can't be like something that was a real hiccup that is going to, just immediately lead a provider to be dismissive in the future, right? So like trust is a core component, and I think that's also another reason to start kind of on the more basic end before you get in this more advanced realm of analytics and dashboarding that you produce. I mean, the second thing I said earlier was examples. Like, I think I've noticed in my interactions with presenting this data over the past couple of years, that the more you can bring specific examples around, again, here are the 10 cases that happened over the past month, and here's the patient journey that went through each of them. Like, being able to show that level of granularity and it matched with what the provider had experienced, or even showed them parts of a patient's journey that they weren't aware of because they weren't a part of it. I think that gives them, it makes them feel like, hey, they're really seeing the full picture here, versus being just kind of like a rolled up number on a page. And then I think the last thing I think about is maybe minimalism is the right word for it, but there's so much a provider is thinking about on a day-to-day basis. And we've gotten this feedback from a few different clients a couple years ago, but you can't put 20 things on a page, right? Put the 2 things or the 3 things you want them to see. If they ask for more, they ask for more, then edit at that point. But start on the minimal point and build from there.
Yeah. Dr. Hansen, how on point did we get it?
Yeah, no, I think that's right. As you were talking, Zach, what I always keep in mind is that there is the majority of a provider's time is going to be spent on things that aren't going to be metric attached. Like, there's not enough. We can't measure all of the value that a provider is delivering. And I don't think we should try. To my earlier point, we should be really clear on a very limited set of things that will be non-negotiable in terms of performance, and then trust that the doctors, that the caregivers will do the right thing, because we are in an industry of people that are caregivers, and I think it's okay to trust them to do the right thing, but it's not okay to just like say go do it. Like, there has to be some direction alongside that.
Yeah. Perfect. So I want to save some time for audience Q&A. So for folks on the line, definitely use the Q&A box here to drop some questions in that are top of mind for you, for Zach, and for Dr. Hansen. While everybody is kind of doing that, I don't want folks to think that this is the last chance to kind of engage and talk with these two. If you want to continue this topic, we do have a playbook that we've put together with some of the tips that Zach and Dr. Hansen have compiled for us. So definitely put yes in the chat if you would like to get access to that. And while folks are also putting their Q&A, I have a couple of lightning questions to kind of get us started here, Dr. Hansen. So you have to answer quickly, 25 words or less, first thing that comes to mind. But what is one metric that you guys think is overrated?
Readmission.
Annual wellness visit.
I only have 25 words. I'll be quick. Readmission, because all readmission is a subset of admissions. We should be creating management and incentives that address admissions, and we'll deal with the readmission downstream of that as a result.
That was not.
Annual wellness visit, because there can be very high quality annual wellness visits and not, and they can lead in 2 different directions.
Okay. What's something that's underrated?
Want to go first on this one, Zach?
Um, I think patient churn. A lot of people look at just seeing have my patients stayed the same year over year, but a lot of times it's a heavy outflux and influx. When you're really treating, the same patients year over year, you build a relationship, you build, you know that panel, and you're able to treat them better. So patient churn.
I'm going to say functional status. We put so much effort into capturing diagnosis, but diagnosis in terms of what it is to be a patient and live every day that's not really what it's about. It's about functional status. And so if we measured functional status, we would be optimizing that, and we should.
Perfect. Okay, Garrett, one more, and then we'll turn to you. What are you guys most excited about for data being applied to in the future? Again, 25 words or less.
I am interested in how all the digitization of our lives can inform interventions that will be more effective at behavior change. Maybe that's self-explanatory, but at the risk of going over 25 words a little bit more, I'm going to say, like, there are so many industries that know human behavior and can push it in the direction they want. In our industry, we need to change human behavior to optimize health, and I don't think we've pulled on all the levers that are there. I think that increasing access to data of non-standard types will help us with that.
I'd say newer, quicker ways to call out things that are outliers or bending the cost curve. So we like things like increased wound care spending or fraudulent DME spending. Like that stuff has been found, but almost found too late, and needs to be found earlier and more often.
Yeah. Perfect. Okay, Garrett, over to you.
All right. Well, we don't have a whole lot of time, but we do have time for one question. And anyway, and this question is this. And this is directed to Zach, actually. How do you build trust with provider organizations?
Yeah, I mean, I think we hit on this a little for providers specifically, but I think it's having clear and transparent uh, ways to explain your methodologies that you're putting forth, right? And not trying to hide behind, a black box of algorithms that says like this is how it was created, right? The more you can, talk to the person on the other side as if they're human and they can understand this too, the better you're going to build trust.
Perfect.
Great. Well, that was brief and concise, and unfortunately, that is all the time we have. But don't worry, if you asked a question, submitted a question, someone will reach out to you to make sure that we answer your question. So even if you have one now that you think of, go ahead and drop it in the box, and someone will get back to you about that. Did you want to say a couple words, Blair, about these
Yeah,
webinars?
we will absolutely address every question. And if folks are interested in kind of what we are up to next, we have a couple of webinars that are coming up, and we would love to see folks on the line. But Garrett, I will let you wrap things up.
All right, sounds good. And there will be links to those webinars in the slides that we will make available here. As we close out, though, I wanted to thank you all for coming and encourage you to head over to vbcexhibithall.com and check out the Arcadia virtual exhibit booth they have there. There's a lot of great resources and tools that you can see what they're doing, do kind of a deeper dive on them and what they're doing in the space, and of course, reach out to them through there. There's also a lot of great resources in the library at vbcexhibithall.com, including where this webinar is going to be archived. And there's going to be a lot of great tools, and all the webinars we've ever done with Arcadia and CareJourney are there, as well as a lot of other materials for your reference. So please head over there and check it out. And then finally, if you would like to reach out directly to the Arcadia team, their information is here on this page, this final slide. So Zach and Dr. Hansen and Blair are all on here. And so feel free to do that or to reach out to me. I'm happy to facilitate an introduction if that is easier for you. But wanted to thank you all again for joining us. Thank you, Blair. Thank you, Zach. Thank you, Dr. Hansen, for a fantastic presentation. And we'll see you on the next one. So have a great rest of your day.
Thank you all.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, everyone.